Welcome to our channel. This is our first case. It was close to midnight when I finally left the coffee shop. I had lingered there longer than I meant to, hiding behind the glow of my laptop screen, as though drowning myself in work would somehow delay the inevitable walk home. The streets in my neighborhood were not dangerous in the usual sense. No gangs, no drug dealers, no constant threat of muggings. But there was something else, something harder to explain. The quiet. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that hummed inside your ears, making you aware of how alone you were, how vulnerable your footsteps sounded against the cracked sidewalks. Most people drove through my street without even noticing. I, however, walked it every night, and every night it seemed to change, as though the street itself shifted when the clock struck 12. That night, the air was colder than usual. My breath curled in pale clouds under the glow of the streetlights. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me and started down the long road home. My apartment was a good 15-minute walk from the cafe, and normally I filled that silence with music. But tonight, for some reason I couldn't explain, I left my earbuds in my pocket. I wanted to hear everything. The first stretch of the walk was uneventful. Closed storefronts lined the street, darkened windows with peeling posters, neon signs flickering out as if giving up. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. I counted my steps, a nervous habit, trying to drown the echo of my shoes on the pavement. 37, 38, 39. Then I saw him. At first, he looked like anyone else, a man standing under a streetlight, maybe waiting for a bus or a ride. He wore a long coat that fluttered slightly in the breeze, his head tilted just enough to cast his face in shadow. I slowed without meaning to, my mind automatically searching for explanations. Who waits for a bus at midnight when no buses run? Why stand so still when the night was freezing? As I drew closer, something about him unsettled me. He wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight from foot to foot the way people normally do. His body was frozen, like a mannequin planted in the middle of the sidewalk. Only his head moved, slowly tilting upward until I felt the weight of his stare. My skin prickled. I told myself to keep walking, to pass him without hesitation, but my body resisted. Every instinct screamed that acknowledging him, looking too long, walking too close, would be a mistake. So I crossed the street. That should have been the end of it, but when I reached the opposite sidewalk and risked a glance back, my heart stuttered. The streetlight flickered once, twice, then steadied, and in that fraction of darkness, he vanished. There was no sound of footsteps retreating, no car engine starting, just gone. I froze in place, staring at the empty spot where he had been. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe he had slipped into a doorway. Maybe my eyes had played tricks on me. But the street was bare. Every storefront was locked and shuttered. There was nowhere for him to go in that instant. For the rest of the walk, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, the street stretched behind me, empty, silent. Yet the hairs on my arms stood on end, and my chest felt tight, as though someone's gaze pressed into my back. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door 3 times before sliding the chain into place. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked pale, almost sick. I laughed at myself, a hollow sound in the empty room, trying to dismiss it as paranoia. But then came the dream. That night, I woke at 3:07 a.m. to find my bedroom window fogged over, as though someone had pressed their face against it from the outside. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, and in the condensation, smeared by what looked like the drag of a finger, were the words, "Did you see me?" I didn't sleep again. The morning after the first encounter, I told myself it had been nothing more than exhaustion, a trick of the mind, a shadow where there shouldn't have been one, but denial only works for so long. When the sunlight poured through my blinds, the words on the window were gone. The glass was clear, spotless. I wiped my palm across it, half hoping to smear something, half fearing I would feel residue from a finger that wasn't mine. Nothing. My landlord would have laughed if I complained fog on the glass. Must have been your imagination. So I swallowed it down. I made coffee, drowned it in too much sugar, and buried myself in work. But every time my thoughts drifted, I saw those words again. Did you see me? The walks continue. By the third night, I had convinced myself to take the same walk again. It wasn't courage, not really. It was something darker, the kind of compulsion you can't name, like scratching a wound, knowing you'll only make it bleed more. The street was empty, just like before. Streetlights buzzing overhead. Windows shuttered. Silence heavy enough to choke on. I walked faster this time. My hands were buried deep in my jacket pockets, fingernails biting into my palms. I counted my steps again, 37, 38, 39, and then I forced myself to look. He wasn't there. The corner where I'd seen him stood empty. Relief rushed in so quickly it almost made me laugh. Maybe I really had imagined it. Maybe it had been some drunk guy or a late-night worker cutting through the street. I exhaled, shaky but lighter, but the relief didn't last, because when I glanced at the glass window of the old laundromat, I saw him, not behind me, not across the street, reflected. The silhouette stood directly behind me in the glass. I spun around so fast my shoes scraped against the sidewalk. Nothing. The road was bare, the air still. My chest heaved. I pressed my back against the laundromat's door, staring at the reflection again. Empty now. Just me, pale and trembling. That night, I didn't go home right away. I ducked into a 24-hour diner instead. The waitress gave me a strange look when I sat in the corner booth, staring at the window as though expecting something to appear. I ordered coffee I didn't want, just to anchor myself in normalcy, and for a while, it worked. The sound of plates clattering, the hiss of the fryer, the low hum of conversation, it was grounding, almost enough to make me forget. Almost, until I went to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was cracked down the middle. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the adrenaline. When I looked up, my reflection wasn't alone. Over my shoulder, in the farthest corner of the room, a shadowed figure stood, too tall, too thin, motionless. I whipped around, heart slamming against my ribs. No one there, but the stall door creaked as though someone had just slipped inside. I didn't wait to find out. The stranger escalates. The following days blurred together. I barely slept, barely ate. The stranger began to appear everywhere in reflections, in peripheral glimpses, in the edges of dreams that bled into waking. At first, he only stood and stared, silent, oppressive. Then came the whispers. One night, lying in bed, I woke to the sound of someone breathing in the room, shallow, ragged, uneven. My apartment was too quiet for mistakes. I knew that sound wasn't mine. I turned slowly, every nerve burning. The corner of the room was darker than it should have been. Not the natural gradient of shadow, but a thick, pulsing black that seemed to absorb light, and from that blackness came the faintest whisper, like breath sliding against my ear though I was halfway across the room. You saw me. I bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp. Light flooded the space. The corner was empty, but the air still felt thick, as though someone had only just stepped away. The next morning, my neighbor, an old woman named Mrs. Dyer, knocked on my door. Her eyes narrowed at my pale face, my trembling hands. "Rough nights?" she asked, voice raspy with age. "Yeah," I muttered, forcing a smile. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You've seen him, haven't you?" I froze. Her gaze sharpened. Tall man, doesn't speak, stands too still. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't look at him. Whatever you do, don't acknowledge him." Then she turned and shuffled back to her apartment, leaving me stunned in the doorway. I tried not to look. I kept my eyes down on walks, forced myself not to check reflections, avoided mirrors. But it didn't matter. He wanted to be seen. One night, I woke to find myself standing at the window, blinds open. I didn't remember getting out of bed. My forehead was pressed against the cold glass, eyes locked on the street below. And there he was, standing in the middle of the road, directly under the flickering streetlight, looking up, waiting. I couldn't move. My body was rigid, like strings pulled tight. And then, slowly, his hand lifted. A single finger pointed upward, pointed at me. The glass fogged beneath my breath. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare as the whisper curled through my mind again. "You saw me. Now I see you." And the light went out. When it came back on, he was gone. I collapsed to the floor, shaking so violently I thought my bones might crack. That was the night I realized this wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't just paranoia. It was an invitation, and I had already accepted. The first 2 nights had been warnings. The third was a promise. I hadn't left my apartment in 2 days, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every corner of the room seemed to breathe with its own darkness, and every reflective surface carried the threat of a shape standing just beyond me. My bathroom mirror was covered with an old sheet. My laptop camera was taped over. Even the television screen, blank and black, gave me the impression of eyes staring from within. But silence never means safety. Silence just gives space for the whispers to arrive. They came in waves, soft at first, no more than the wind. Then clearer, sharper, as though someone were leaning close to my ear. "You saw me." The words repeated endlessly, like a dripping faucet I couldn't fix. Sometimes it grew louder, echoing inside my skull until I clamped my hands over my ears and begged for quiet. That's when I decided I couldn't do this alone anymore. I went to Mrs. Dyer. She had seemed to know something before, that old woman with sunken eyes and trembling hands. When she opened the door, the smell of dust and boiled tea clung to the air. "You shouldn't have looked for me," she whispered before I even spoke. "I need answers," I said, my voice hoarse. "Who is he? What is he?" Her lips trembled, as if the words themselves could summon him. She gestured for me to sit. Her apartment was a museum of faded photographs, doilies, and clocks that had all stopped ticking long ago. "He has no name," she said finally, pouring tea into a chipped porcelain cup. "We call him the stranger, but that isn't what he island. He doesn't follow you, he waits for you. He waits for someone to notice." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" Her eyes fixed on mine, pity heavy in them. "Because you looked too long, because you admitted he was real. That's all it takes." I gripped the edge of the chair, desperate. "How do I stop him?" She hesitated, then leaned forward. "You don't. You walk the last walk, and if you survive, you pass him to someone else." Her words chilled me deeper than the whispers ever had. Pass him to someone else. Her nod was slow, mournful. "He doesn't vanish. He only moves, and he always demands to be seen." I left her apartment more broken than when I'd entered. Nights stretched longer, days blurred. I felt myself unraveling. Every reflection betrayed me. The dull gleam of a spoon, the faint shimmer of a picture frame, even the sheen of my own eyes in the bathroom sink. He was always there, behind me, beside me, or worse, inside the reflection, watching with perfect stillness. The whispers grew bolder. Now they spoke not only of what I had done, but of what was coming. The walk is waiting. You cannot hide forever. Step outside. I barricaded my door, locked the windows, yet still I woke each night standing in front of the glass, staring down at the street. My body betrayed me, compelled by forces I couldn't resist, and every time, there he stood, unwavering under the flickering streetlight, until one night he moved. The stranger lifted a hand, not to point, but to beckon, a single curling finger, inviting me down. My heart pounded, but my feet shifted on their own. Before I knew it, I had unlocked the door, stepped into the night air, and felt the cold pavement under my shoes. The last walk had begun. The street was emptier than I'd ever seen it, as if the world had been scrubbed of life. No cars passed, no dogs barked, no wind rustled the trees. Only the buzz of failing streetlights accompanied me. He stood 50 feet ahead, waiting. His form was tall, thin, stretched beyond human proportion. His face, if it was a face, was always obscured, shifting like a smear of shadow. Step by step, I followed, unable to stop. He never moved quickly, just enough to remain ahead, always leading me deeper into the night. I passed familiar places, the laundromat, the diner, the bus stop. Each one looked abandoned, hollow shells of themselves. Windows were boarded up, doors chained shut. Even the neon signs that usually glowed with eternal brightness were dark. It felt like the stranger had peeled me out of the real world and dragged me into his own. I tried to call out, to beg, to demand answers. My voice came out strangled, swallowed instantly by the air. He never turned, never acknowledged, just kept walking. 37 steps, 38, 39, the number that had haunted me from the beginning. At 39, he finally stopped. We stood in front of a building I didn't recognize. Old brick, crumbling mortar, a single iron door rusted by years of neglect. Above it, no sign, no number, only darkness. The stranger placed his hand on the door, and it swung inward soundlessly. He stepped inside, and I followed. The interior was wrong. That's the only word I can use. The hall stretched longer than the building's size could contain. The walls pulsed with shadows, shifting like veins beneath skin. Dim bulbs flickered overhead, each one straining against the darkness that seemed to swallow their glow. Whispers crawled along the walls, no longer in my head but aloud, echoing in countless voices. You saw me, you saw me, you saw me. I stumbled forward, dizzy, and realized photographs lined the corridor. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, all in crooked frames. Every photo was the same, different people standing under the streetlight, staring up in terror. And in each photo, behind them, the stranger loomed. At the end of the hall stood a mirror taller than any I'd seen, reaching from floor to ceiling. Its surface rippled like water. The stranger turned to me for the first time. Though his face was obscured, I felt the weight of his gaze press against my skull. He lifted a hand and pointed at the mirror. I shook my head violently. No, I won't. The whispers rose, a tidal wave. You saw me, now see yourself. Against my will, I stepped closer. The mirror shimmered, and instead of my reflection, I saw another figure, someone younger, frightened, standing in the same spot I had weeks ago on the street corner, under the light, staring at me, Realization slammed into me. I was no longer the victim. I was becoming the stranger. I screamed, pounded my fists against the glass, but the figure in the mirror only shrank back in fear, mirroring what I had once been. The stranger's hand pressed against my shoulder, cold and final. The glass rippled once more, and I was pulled through. Darkness swallowed me. When I opened my eyes, I was standing under the streetlight again. My body felt heavy, elongated, wrong. My face was nothing but shadow. Across the street, in the window of a dim apartment, someone stood. A man, ordinary, tired, sipping coffee. He paused, looked out, and his eyes locked on mine. The connection was made. The cycle continued, and I understood now. There was never one stranger, only countless souls, trapped and passed on, bound to the gaze of those who dared to look too long. I raised my hand, a single finger curling forward, inviting him, waiting for the last walk to begin again. The video ends here. Please subscribe to the channel to follow our case in the next videos.